The halls were long, sterile, and suffocatingly quiet. A smell of disinfectant lingered in the air, mixed with faint traces of stale food. Wheelchairs squeaked on polished floors, and televisions hummed softly in the background. This was the rhythm of the nursing home, a place where days blended into each other, and where people stopped seeing you as a person with a story, a history, a will of your own. Here you were just another chair pushed against the wall, another pill on the tray, another name on the shift chart. That morning I heard it again. The words cut sharper than any medical procedure, sharper than the ache in my bones. "You'll stay in the nursing home forever." I froze when I heard it, whispered not directly to me, but loud enough so no one could mistake the message. The staff laughed lightly, the kind of laughter people use when they think dignity is already gone and doesn't need guarding. They thought age had made me deaf or weak or both. They thought the spark in me had been snuffed out the moment I was wheeled through those doors. But I heard them, and I understood every syllable, forever. To them, I wasn't someone who had lived a life, raised a family, built homes, signed contracts, survived storms and wars of the heart. No, to them I was a number in a file, a bed that would always be occupied until the day it was wheeled away empty. They believed they had clipped the wings of my life, that I was grounded in this place, stripped of freedom, of choice. And yet, deep in my chest, a quiet fire flickered. I played their game of silence. I kept my face still, my eyes lowered, letting them believe I was as helpless as they imagined. Let them think I had accepted this cage, lined with pastel wallpaper and scheduled mealtimes. They had no idea that while they saw weakness, I still felt strength. While they saw confinement, I still saw doors. I knew something they didn't, something they couldn't imagine, because they assumed this place was the end. They assumed I had no decisions left, no papers left to sign, no authority left to hold. What they didn't know was that forever isn't decided by whispers in the hallway. Forever isn't dictated by staff who clock in and clock out. Forever was still mine to decide. And that night, I would prove it. The days passed in a rhythm that wasn't my own. Morning medication at 6, breakfast trays at 7, craft activities scheduled neatly on a bulletin board no one cared to read. We moved like shadows in those halls, wheeled, guided, pushed, and always watched. Outside, the world lived freely with noise and chaos. Inside, the silence pressed down like a weight. It wasn't the walls that felt like prison. It was their voices. "You'll be here forever. You're not able to live on your own. Better get used to it." The words came not as statements of care, but of condescension. Pity disguised as certainty. They spoke of me as if I was furniture, useful until worn and then forgotten in a corner. When family visited, I could see the same looks in their eyes. Relief that I was taken care of, tucked away neatly in a safe box where their obligations ended. The pain of aging was nothing compared to the ache of being dismissed, as if my story had finished, as if the ink on my life had run out. But something inside me sharpened each time I heard those words. They thought they were hammering me in place. Instead, they were fueling a spark that grew hotter with every passing day. I remembered who I had been. The woman who signed the deed to her first house with steady hands. The woman who built businesses, raised children, survived loss, and refused pity. I was not built from fragility. I was built from a lifetime of storms weathered, walls rebuilt, promises kept. The breaking point came one evening. A staff member, young and smug, leaned down as I sat alone by the common room window. She smiled with the kind of sweetness that tastes bitter. "You'll get used to it here. Trust me," she said. "This is your home now, forever." Forever. There it was again. The word rang in my ears, but this time it stung differently. It didn't feel like a sentence anymore. It felt like a dare. That night, as the halls quieted and the others drifted into uneasy sleep, I sat awake in my room. The papers were still hidden where no one had thought to look. Papers that bore my name, my authority, my rights they all assumed had turned to ash. My heart thumped steady, not with fear but resolve. They believed I had no choice, that I belonged to this place. But before the sun rose, I would remind them my life was never theirs to decide. The nursing home quieted like a stage after the curtain falls. Lights dimmed, overhead announcements ceased, and the shuffle of footsteps faded to the occasional creak of the night staff. Outside my window, the street lamps glowed like watchful sentries. Inside my room, with its beige curtains and sterile walls, I sat at the edge of the bed with a small folder on my lap. They thought they had stripped me of everything: my independence, my future, my voice. What they didn't know was that I had one thing they could never take: everything. I had prepared long before they imagined me weak. My fingers slid across the folder's edge. It wasn't heavy, but within it lay the kind of power they assumed. I no longer held deeds, documents, agreements, set in place in anticipation of days like these, when others would try to write my ending without my consent. I opened the folder slowly, the papers neatly stacked. My name bold in black ink across the titles. To them, I was another frail patient waiting quietly for the end. But in reality, I still owned my story. I still owned more than they would ever dream. The cruel repetition of forever echoed faintly in my head. But this time I smiled. Forever was not theirs to decide. Forever could end with the stroke of my pen. I pulled the capped pen from my nightstand drawer, the one they didn't bother to check because they believed. I had no business with ink or signatures anymore. My hands may have carried the lines of age, but they were steady now. Steadier than the smug young nurse's voice had been when she whispered forever at me earlier that day. I read the papers once more. Confirmation of ownership. Authorization of transfer. A sale that would go into effect the moment I signed. They thought forever meant bars on my freedom, but forever to me meant passing my legacy on in a way that would rewrite their smirks into silence. I pressed the pen down to the paper. For a moment, time stopped. I could feel my father's strength in my veins, my mother's resolve in my bones, and every version of myself who had once conquered fire and storm now guiding me. I signed each page slowly, deliberately, the ink soaking into the paper like fire spreading through dry wood. When I was finished, I set the pen down, my hands calm, my heart unshaken. The papers weren't simply signed. They were sealed fate. By morning, they would realize the patient they believed powerless had made the one move no one expected. I didn't belong to the nursing home. The nursing home, and much more, still belonged to me. Morning came quietly, as it always did. The rattle of breakfast carts echoed down the hall, the clink of trays followed by the same monotone voices greeting each room. To everyone else, it was just another day of routine. More pills, more schedules, more waiting. But for me, it was the morning after. I sat upright in my chair, dressed neatly, my folder resting calmly on my lap. When the administrator walked in, wearing that fixed smile he reserved for difficult patients, he didn't know the ground beneath his feet had already shifted. He went through his usual pleasantries, speaking slowly as if age had stolen my ability to understand. And then finally he said the words again, as if rehearsed. "You'll be here forever. This is your home now." I slid the folder across the desk between us. His hand hesitated before opening it. I watched his smile falter, his eyes darting across the pages, confusion twisting into disbelief. The bold letters screamed louder than my words ever could. Transfer of ownership. His lips parted, struggling over a jumble of syllables. You sold this place?" "Yes," I answered, calm but fierce. "Last night. While you thought I was powerless, I signed away every piece of authority you believed you had. This home no longer belongs to you, and neither do I." The room went silent. Outside the doorway, a nurse froze mid-step, her tray rattling slightly as the echoes of my words carried down the corridor. One by one, faces appeared, curious, inquisitive, unbelieving. The whispers began to spread. She sold it. She really sold it. I leaned forward, my eyes steady on the man across from me. "You said forever as though my story was over. But you forgot whose name was still on those papers. You forgot who I was long before I ever walked through these doors." By noon, the news had spread. The home was changing hands. The smug staff who spoke of me with pity and dismissal now avoided my gaze. And the residents, those who had believed themselves trapped, began to whisper with something rare in this place: hope. I did not stay for their excuses. I didn't need their apologies. I rose slowly, each step deliberate, steady, carrying me out into the sunlight. The doors that were meant to hold me closed now opened wide. I was no longer their patient, no longer their prisoner. I was proof that the end of the road is not written by others. It is signed by your own hand. They said I would stay here forever, but forever was mine to decide, and I had already walked out of it.